Well, today we're in week 3 of our Chaos series, and we're going to talk today about how to grieve in chaos. We're joined by Pastor Ross Anderson. Ross, before we jump into some really practical strategies that you want to give us for grieving in the midst of chaos, why do you think this is hard sometimes for Christians to get their head around?
Well, I think there's this thing that we're taught as Christians. We're supposed to be joyful all the time. The Bible does say to rejoice, and joy is a fruit of the Spirit. So we think, man, if I'm sad or if I'm grieving, then I must not be trusting God, or I must not be living by the Spirit because I don't think I'm joyful right now. So sometimes it's really easy for Christians to kind of put on a fake front or to pretend like everything's great when really they're going through some difficult emotional times. We want to give people some perspective on that.
All right, so let's go through each of these 4 biblical tips, and we'll give you some scripture to support all of it. And I think, Ross, you help us understand it, maybe even share some of your own personal experience with grief as small groups and mentors kind of talk through these 4 strategies. Here's the first one: take it straight to God. Talk to God about what you're feeling and try reading the Psalms for good measure.
Right. A lot of times when we're going through something really hard and grief, we want to pull away from God or even blame God for that. But the model that we have in the Bible is going to God. And we see it in the Psalms. That's why reading the Psalms is really good, because the Psalms are this book of emotional honesty and vulnerability. And so many things are in the Psalms that reflect how we're feeling. And so King David, who wrote many of the Psalms, he was really honest with God about his emotions. In Psalm 119, verse 28, he says, I weep with sorrow. Encourage me by your word. So he didn't stuff it in. He didn't, deny it, whatever. He says, I'm weeping right now. But God, I'm going to talk to you about that. I'm going to turn to your word for encouragement in that regard.
I think for some people, maybe even Christians included, one of the reasons that they don't bring it to God is they wonder if God even cares. They wonder if God, is even listening. Maybe they're a little bitter toward God. And I think this verse is so helpful for people. Psalm 34:18, the Lord is close to the brokenhearted. He rescues those whose spirits are crushed.
Right. And that's such a great promise that God is close. And he's not just passively watching from a distance, but he comes in right beside us in our grief. The challenge in the Christian life is that we don't always feel that way, doesn't feel close necessarily. But this is something that we have to learn to trust and rely on, that, hey, all I have to do is reach out and say a word and say a prayer, offer to God, and he's right there. He's with me. He's with me all along the way.
All right, so here's the second tip. Don't stuff it. In other words, allow yourself to feel and express your emotions.
Yeah, you can see this follows right on the first one. If I'm going to be honest with God about it, I'm going to go to God with my feelings and talk to him about it. That means I have to acknowledge them, and I'm willing to express them. And so, it's, again, the Bible models for us, and the Psalms are great about this, but other places too, models for us that we have permission to express, to talk about, to put into words the things that we're feeling. A great example is King David, not just the Psalms that he wrote, but his own experience in life. One of his greatest losses was when his son Absalom rebelled against him, and he had to go to battle against his own son. And in the battle, his son was killed. And so in 2 Samuel 18, you see how he responded to that. So the king was overcome with emotion. He went up to the room over the gateway and burst into tears. So there's an expression. He didn't stuff it. He wasn't stoical about it. He allowed himself to express that because he was really grieving, and it was really real.
All right, your third tip is an extension really of the second one, and it's to engage with people. And you give 2 practical tips really here. You say, first of all, let friends help you with practical needs. But then secondly, talk it out with friends who care.
It's a natural impulse when you're grieving some kind of loss to pull away from people. And, it's okay to you need some time to be alone maybe, but we can take it too far. And so there's just 2 ways that you can engage. One, let people help with practical needs. All right. I remember when my wife passed away, it's been about 8 years now. I just had some friends who made some phone calls that needed to be made, and some other ones who picked up some of my load at work. And so just practical, people brought over meals. And so I didn't have to worry about that because I didn't have the emotional bandwidth to do that. And then talk about it. Romans 12, verse 15 calls us to be happy with those who are happy and to weep with those who weep. And so in the family of Christ, maybe in a small group or maybe with a mentor, there's someone that can help you um, shoulder the load, but also we want to be around people who will help us remember God's faithfulness and God's goodness to us during that time of grief.
Yeah, that's good. Now, your last tip, Ross, is different from all the others, but I think it's maybe it's one of the most practical ones, and it comes from one of the 10 commandments. You say, get some rest. Give yourself permission to slow down and experience what the Old Testament would call Sabbath rest.
Grief emotionally has a way of just sapping your energy, and you will be tired. Now, sometimes grief is huge, sometimes it's small, but depending on the size of the loss, but it's still going to have an emotional draining effect. And so I'm not going to be able to do everything I would normally do. I have to adjust my expectations, and it's okay to say no to things that people want from you. It's okay to take us a little bit of time off and just rest. And that Sabbath principle is designed by God to keep us going. And so, especially in times of grief, I really need to observe some rest.